Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. Just to remind you that we've uploaded the Mindspeak session with the East African Community's Secretary General, Dr. Richard Sesibera. And then also I've linked to that piece I wrote when I was on my jaunt in Johannesburg, Snapshots from South Africa and its role in Africa's economy. And I can't resist putting up this photograph for somebody in his 40s. It's rather exciting to be driving an open-top Jaguar, I must admit. And I did enjoy myself. It was a wonderful drive. And I'd actually never driven an automatic before then. So I thoroughly enjoyed learning how to drive one. Some defensive driving skills they taught us as well, which are very useful in Nairobi. I am sure. Really had a good time, so thank you. In that piece, I'm basically talking about the fact that I found myself in this hotel, which seemed to be in the epicenter of the Afrikaner homeland, on a Friday night, a happy hour. I think we were the only non-Afrikaner folks in there, but it was fascinating to watch and most enjoyable. And I ended up banging my head on a glass door at 2 in the morning, which sort of was quite helpful in point of fact, saved me up rather quickly. I had a very good time. I'm reading Paul Theroux's The Last Train to Zona Verde. It really is very good. He starts off in Cape Town, observations about South Africa from there, and then he goes up into Windhoek in Namibia, and he's going to cross into Angola, and I've got to Namibia at the moment. Of course, Louis Theroux was at school with us. I think he was a few years below me, and I like his documentaries particularly. His father, Paul Theroux, in The Tower of Travel, said, "The wish to travel seems to me characteristically human. The desire to move, to satisfy your curiosity or ease your fears, to change the circumstances of your life, to be a stranger, to make a friend, to experience an exotic landscape, to risk the unknown." I'll put up a photograph of the Johannesburg sunset on Friday evening before that happy hour, and then sunrise over the South Pacific Ocean taken from the International Space Station that I found on Twitter. Political reflections. US Secretary of State John Kerry told Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in a phone call that any Russian efforts at destabilization would incur costs. US State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said that in the telephone call, Mr. Kerry called on Russia to publicly disavow the activities of separatist saboteurs and provocateurs in Ukraine. She said Mr. Kerry noted that the actions in eastern Ukraine do not appear to be a spontaneous set of events. He made clear that any further Russian efforts to destabilize Ukraine will incur further costs for Russia. The US and the EU have already imposed targeted sanctions on Russian and Ukrainian individuals over the annexation of Crimea. My conclusions are, that Russia could not afford to lose Crimea, and in particular Sevastopol, because without Sevastopol they could not project naval power meaningfully. I do not see that the Russian bear is seeking to munch some more land, but it is a game of hardball, and I think they're playing hardball back. Of course, it was Zbigniew Brzezinski who said about Crimea and the Ukraine, a new and important space on the Eurasian chessboard, is a geopolitical pivot because its very existence as an independent country helps to transform Russia. Without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be a Eurasian empire. I came across this picture of drawings on the rocks near Sevastopol, which looked very interesting. And then Sergei Lavrov, in response to Kerry, wrote in The Guardian, "The West has been needlessly whipping up tension. If we don't cooperate soon, chaos may take hold." The world of today is not a junior school where teachers assign punishments at will. Belligerent statements such as those heard at the NATO foreign ministers meeting in Brussels on the 1st of April do not match demands for a de-escalation. De-escalation should begin with rhetoric. It is time to stop the groundless whipping up of tension and to return to serious common work, he said. I'll put up a photograph of President Kagame and the UN chief Ban Ki-moon lighting the torch in memory of the genocide. Kagame made some very strong comments. All genocides begin with an ideology, a system of ideas that says this group of people here are less than human and deserve to be exterminated, Kagame started. In a long speech, speaking in an unusually high tone, Kagame gave their involvement in genocide a more historical punch. The most devastating reality of the European control of Africa and Rwanda was the transformation of social distortions into so-called races. We were classified and dissected, and whatever differences existed were magnified according to the framework formed elsewhere. Told an audience of over 30,000 people. He said the colonialists who designed this caste system that eventually engulfed Rwanda in 1994 had no scientific basis. Turning to the West's meddling in the affairs of African countries, Kagame delivered a punch. We know your reconciliation in your countries like we do. We ask that you engage Rwanda and Africa with an open mind, accepting that our efforts are carried in good faith for the benefit of all of us who started. But for those who think that for Rwanda and Africa to be governed properly by its people requires their endorsement, that is out. We appreciate your contributions precisely because we do not feel you owe us anything, he added. He said Rwanda was supposed to be a failed state, could have become a permanent UN protectorate with little hope of ever becoming a nation. But we didn't end up like that. What prevented these scenarios with the choices of the Rwandan people, he said. The commemoration today marks 20 years since the downing of the plane carrying the former president over Kanombe Airport on April 7th, which sparked the genocide. There's a link there for President Kagame on Mindspeak as well. U.S. Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel is escorted by Chinese military personnel as he arrives at Qingdao International Airport in China on April 7th. I couldn't resist that photograph. I couldn't resist this photograph of a U.S. Navy Poseidon P-8 taking off to assist in the search for debris from the missing Malaysian airline flight MH370. There was a guest on Fox who says he still believes the MH370 might have landed in another country and got repainted. Bloomberg is picking up on Seymour Hersh's article, The Red Line and the Rat Line, which is about Obama, Erdogan, and the Syrian rebels. And I just went back to this piece in Seymour Hersh's article. So the foreign policy expert told me that the account he heard originated with Donilan. It was later corroborated by a former US official who learned of it from a senior Turkish diplomat. According to the expert, Erdogan had sought the meeting to demonstrate to Obama that the red line had been crossed and had brought Fidan along to state the case. When Erdogan tried to draw Fidan into the conversation and Fidan began speaking, Obama cut him off and said, "We know." Erdogan tried to bring Fidan in a second time and Obama again cut him off and said, "We know." At that point, an exasperated Erdogan said, "But your red line has been crossed." And the expert told me, Donilon said, Erdogan fucking waved his finger at the president inside the White House. Obama then pointed at Fidan and said, we know what you're doing with the radicals in Syria. Donilon, who joined the Council on Foreign Relations last July, didn't respond to questions about this story. A spokesman for the National Security Council confirmed that the dinner took place and provided a photograph showing Obama, Kerry, Donilon, Erdogan, Fidan, and Davutoglu sitting at a table. Beyond that, she said, I'm not going to read out the details of their discussions. And in fact, President Obama did well to to stare these people down. I'll put up a photograph of Obama and Erdogan speaking that I found on Wikipedia. Moving on to international markets, East Asia Pacific has served as the world's growth engine since the global financial crisis. This is Axel von Trotzenberg from the World Bank. Second to that region, actually, is the East African community. Developing East Asia will grow 7.1% this year, largely unchanged from 2013. East Asia remains the fastest growing region in the world. Currency markets, the euro is a little bit firmer at 137.43. ECB Executive Board member Yves Mersch said deflation risks aren't imminent, and Governing Council member Yuval Nawatny signaled there is no immediate need for action, so just rowing back a little. Dollar index 80.20, we're still at this key level, but sort of meandering around. Japanese yen 102.96 touched 102.75, which was the strongest since March 28. Swiss franc 0.8879. The pound 166.16, back above 166. The Aussie 0.9290 touched 0.9308, which was the highest since November the 21st on April 4. India rupee back above 60 at 60.31, but I think Modi is going to be a decisive winner there. South Korean won 1052.91, the Real 221.92, climbed 0.8% yesterday in Sao Paulo, and this is the strongest closing level since October 30th last year. Egyptian pound 697.40, and the Rand is even firmer than this level because this was a couple of hours ago of 1051.36. I'll come to that in a moment. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. It should be showing more momentum given that it's actually crossed that level I was talking about, but it seems to be in a slumber still. Euro dollar, we've improved up to 137.43. That's because of the comments that came out of the ECB. Interesting news that GDT price index, which is considered a market reference for dairy products, hits a 13-month low. International dairy prices have fallen to their lowest level in more than a year. New Zealand, of course, is the most exposed to this. The price of 30% of New Zealand's merchandise exports have just fallen 18.1% in 2 months, which is quite dramatic. The New Zealand dollar has been one of the better performing currencies. It's top percentile. I'll put up a 1-year chart, you can see for yourself. Gold was around the 1300 level. I think you sell rallies in 2014. Morgan Stanley said that they expect the decline to resume. The factors that boosted bullion in the first quarter, including tensions in Ukraine, are set to weaken, analyst Joel Crane wrote in a report today. While the 2014 forecast was raised 5% to $1,219, average prices are still expected to drop for the first 4 quarters, Crane said. Crude oil above 100.97. Let's keep an eye on it, but I think you sell it above this level. Copper, I'll put up a 1-year chart of that. Copper prices have fallen 9.3% this year, and that's put a lot of pressure on the Zambian economy, where they've just issued some pricing for a 10-year Eurobond. Frontier markets, interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal. Frontier markets lure more investors. Frontier market funds included in Morningstar and analytics databases have grown in size by 62% in the 12 months to February 2014. Money invested in the 9 largest dedicated frontier funds on the FE analytics database of funds grew from £1.3 billion at the end of February 2013 to £2.1 billion at the same point in 2014. And that goes to my point that actually the frontier market universe is so small in comparison to emerging markets that it has an absorption limit in point of fact. Coming to Africa, the African pandemic that keeps getting worse. This is about the Ebola virus, saying basically it's spreading. What terrifies people so much about Ebola? For starters, listen to this, there's no cure because it's such a rare disease that primarily affects poor African villages. Big countries perhaps haven't seen enough economic opportunity to study the virus, Bloomberg says. Then there's the fact that Ebola deaths are particularly gruesome. The disease comes from an infected animal, most likely the fruit bat, which infects monkeys, apes, pigs, and finally humans. The disease is not airborne, but spreads through blood, secretions, or other bodily fluids. Its early symptoms include fever and intense weakness, WHO says, then deepens with bouts of diarrhea, vomiting, and internal and external bleeding. The migratory pattern of the outbreak, which aid workers call unprecedented, has baffled doctors. Outbreaks before this have stayed in remote pockets of the country, but this iteration shot hundreds of miles from southwest Guinea to the coastal capital of Conakry. So pretty alarming all round. The World Bank put out its latest forecast for sub-Saharan Africa. Africa's pulse shows economic growth rising from 4.7% in 2013 to 5.2% in 2014. Natural resource exports are driving much of the growth, they say. The more spending at the household level due to increased remittances and lower food and fuel prices is boosting growth figures as well. GDP is expected to reach 5.2% in 2014, compared with 4.7% in 2013, and will rise to 5.5% in 2015. Saying that although sub-Saharan Africa's exports remain concentrated in a few strategic commodities, the region's countries have made substantial progress in diversifying their trading partners. Over the last decade, exports to emerging markets such as the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, have grown robustly, primarily due to the prolonged boom in commodities demand. BRICS received only 9% of sub-Saharan Africa's exports in 2000, but accounted for 34% of total exports a decade later. Saying that growth is not inclusive, talking about the demography, saying resource-rich countries are growing much faster at 7% than the non-resource-rich countries at 1.6%. Resources and services sectors are sub-Saharan Africa's best performers. Share of resources rose from 9% in 1995 to 1999 to 12.5% 2007 to 11. Services grew from 40% to 47%. Exports grew at a robust pace driven by the region's natural resources. During 1995 to 2012, region's total exports increased from $68 billion to over $400 billion. Most of this came from things like petroleum, mineral, and metal exports. So it's a very interesting report. The link's there, and I've also drilled into the full report, which is plenty. There's plenty there to look at. Talking about FDI inflows to the region grew 16% to $43 billion in 2013, and that's very positive. And there's a lot of detail there if you care to have a look at that. The French ambassador to Rwanda said on Monday he had been barred from attending events marking the 20th anniversary of the genocide amid a major diplomatic row. Yesterday night, the Rwandan Foreign Ministry telephoned to inform me that I was no longer accredited for the ceremonies, the French ambassador Michel Flech told AFP. I put up a photograph I found on the Twitter handle of the ANC in the streets, and it was quite a lively one. The South African oil share has fallen off a record high. It's now up 4.76% in 2014. However, the big story is the dollar rand, which is at 2014 highs against the dollar. The rand got as high as 10.4647. This is the strongest level since Jan 1. The currency has advanced 1.6% over the past 3 trading sessions. It fell 19% in 2013. And in that piece I wrote over the weekend, snapshots from South Africa and its role in Africa's economy, I says the rand appears to have snapped a more than 12-month downtrend. And indeed it has. Egyptian pound versus the dollar was still just below that 7 mark at 697.60. Egypt's foreign reserves rose to 17.414 billion in March from 17.307 billion in February, the central bank said. The Egyptian stock market is up 11.82% in 2014, but has retreated 11.422% since the 25th of March. Nigerian all shares minus 5.41% this year. I like this comment in The Guardian. The implication of this complicated recalculation is that what we thought was a $270 billion economy is actually worth $510 billion. It's the equivalent of suddenly discovering the existence of 6 Ghanas within Nigeria. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 10.79% in 2014, but all of those returns have been eroded by the slide in the SEDI Ghana. Zambia is set to launch its second Eurobond. Revised yield guidance is in the 8.75% area, plus or minus 12.5 basis points. That's extremely high. SAP Miller to consolidate South African and African regions into one. This is an article in the Wall Street Journal. A British man shot dead while working for the UN in Somalia was a former Scotland Yard detective who launched a new career tracking illegal payments financing terrorism. Simon Davies of Hatfield, Hertfordshire, was hired by the United Nations to meet with Somali businesses and government officials to discuss ways to make sure Al-Qaeda was not using money transfer systems to fund attacks. He and a French colleague were attacked soon after they landed on Monday morning in Galkayo, the town in central Somalia closest to the country's pirate strongholds. The UNHCR is seeking access to detained asylum seekers and refugees in Nairobi. This is a press release from the 7th. Is concerned at the wave of arrests that have taken place during the weekend in Nairobi following recent terrorist attacks in the capital. Police sweeps were concentrated at Eastleigh, where the majority of urban Somali refugees and asylum seekers live, and where some of the attacks occurred. UNHCR has been informed that those arrested are held at various police stations as well as at Kasarani Stadium. In line with its mandate, UNHCR has sought access for itself and its partners to the detained refugees and asylum seekers. Of 550,980 refugees and asylum seekers in Kenya, 50,800, mostly Somali, live in Nairobi. Asymmetric risks remain potent, I'm afraid, and I've not seen so many military vehicles bombing around the city, at least since January 2008. When I think I was one of the few people who came to work on January the 2nd, and I'd look out my window and there wouldn't be a single car, just the odd military one. I put up a photograph of Westgate. That was 196 days ago. Another one of Nairobi. The photograph of Westgate, I'm looking from Ambank House in the city centre, near the city, near Nairobi University. And the one of Nairobi, I'm looking from my office down towards the CBD. The Kenya shilling was last at 86.60. I've got a prediction that it's going to 60 in 5 years, and I've been saying it around the place. Everyone's been quite struck by it. The Nairobi All Share is plus 4.49% in 2014 and has corrected 1.517% off a record high of 144.99 from the 26th of March. The NSE 20 is at 6-week lows and is plus 1.01% in 2014. And finally, there's a link for every share listed at the stock market if you want to check into anything. The Nairobi All Share retreated yesterday, 0.425%. Equity turnover was all concentrated in Safaricom, EABL, KCB and Equity Bank. The NSE 20 lost a hold on 4,900. But we've got Safaricom's results coming ahead of us, which I think will keep that pretty effective. I think the market is not really going to retreat that much, unless, of course, we have a significant worsening in the securities situation.